My name is Claire Anderson. I am 36 years old, and on the night of my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, my sister Sophie shattered me with one single sentence. The dining room glowed with soft candlelight, neighbors shifting in their chairs, and the rose petal cake I had spent hours preparing sat untouched in the center of the table. Sophie lifted her glass, her smile sharp, and said clearly, "Claire, you are holding us back. We would rather live without you." My mother lowered her eyes to her plate. My father sipped his wine without a word, and the silence pressed against my chest harder than Sophie's cruelty. I stood up, forcing a calm smile, and walked out. Little did they know that silence was the beginning of everything. Before I continue, I want to ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed at the very table where you were supposed to feel safe? If you have ever felt that kind of pain, share your story in the comments, and do not forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next one. I grew up in a house that smelled like cedar floors and strong coffee. My father used to say the creak of our hallway was the sound of a home that had been lived in, not just built. As a child, I believed him. I believed a lot of things before I learned how silence can be louder than words. Sophie and I weren't always enemies. In fact, when we were little, she trailed behind me everywhere. She was 4 years younger, with freckles dusting her nose, and a laugh that sounded like the squeak of our rusty porch swing. On summer nights, we would lie on the hood of Dad's old truck, the Texas sky wide and endless above us, and she would whisper, "Promise you'll always stay with me, Claire." I would smile, ruffle her hair, and say, "Always." Back then, I meant it. Back then, I believed she did too. Our childhood was stitched together with small scenes, the kind that look harmless until you replay them as an adult. Mom favored Sophie in ways that seemed natural, buying her a bigger slice of cake, clapping louder at her recitals, excusing her tantrums while mine were scolded. Dad didn't stop her. He would just lean back in his chair, sip his coffee, and say, "That's just how your sister is." I learned early that my role was to hold steady, to be dependable, the daughter who didn't demand too much. I still remember my 12th birthday. I had asked for a sketchbook, nothing fancy, just something to draw the flowers in our backyard. Sophie at 8 got a shiny pink bicycle with a bow tied to the handlebars. Everyone fussed over her snapping pictures as she rode in clumsy circles across the driveway. My cake sat melting in the kitchen, the frosting sliding off in the heat. I blew out my candles alone, my wish swallowed by the sound of everyone cheering for Sophie. I told myself it didn't matter, but a piece of me, small and quiet, broke that day. High school only deepened the cracks. I studied hard, brought home good grades, but whenever I tried to share a test score, Mom would sigh and ask if I could help Sophie with her cheerleading routine instead. Dad praised Sophie's charm, her spark, while I became the responsible shadow who cooked dinner and folded laundry. Responsibility was my currency. Approval was my hunger. And it never seemed enough. When I graduated, I looked for something that was mine. That's when I opened Bloom and Grace, my flower shop on the corner of 7th Street. The place smelled of roses and lilies, of freedom and possibility. Brides came in with nervous smiles and left cradling bouquets I had arranged with careful hands. Little girls would point at daisies, their palms sticky with candy, and I would wrap them in tissue paper just to see them smile. For the first time, I felt alive, like I had created a world where beauty mattered and where I belonged. Sophie visited the shop once in those early days. She leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone, and said, "It's cute, Claire. But how long can flowers pay bills?" I laughed it off, but her words clung to me. It was as if she could not imagine me successful, as if her role was to remind me that I was temporary, expendable. 5 years ago, everything changed with a single phone call. Dad's voice trembled through the receiver. "Claire," he said, "it's drowning. Medical bills from your mother's surgery, the roof leaking, the second mortgage, we're about to lose it all." I remember standing in my shop, the scent of peonies heavy in the air, my hands trembling around a ribbon I hadn't tied. The choice felt instant. Family came first. Without hesitation, I sold Bloom & Grace. $160,000 every cent went into saving them. Mortgage bills, the roof repairs. I told myself it was temporary just until they got back on their feet. But temporary stretched into 5 years. 5 years of me paying nearly $2,000 a month, electricity, water, internet, property taxes, even the smallest repairs. 5 years of waking up early to work at a nursery that paid half of what my shop once gave me. 5 years of carrying everyone while they let me sink quietly. At first, they were grateful. Dad would nod. Mom would hug me. Sophie muttered thanks without looking up from her phone. But gratitude is a fragile thing. It withers quickly when entitlement takes root. Soon, Sophie stopped thanking me altogether. She started rolling her eyes when I entered the room. If I left a mug in the sink, she snapped loud enough for Mom to hear, "You're such a mooch." Mom said nothing. Dad turned the page of his newspaper. And I swallowed the sting, telling myself it was just stress, just a phase. But it wasn't a phase. It was the new reality. I had become invisible in my own home, the ghost who kept the lights on, but was never seen. I used to tell myself that silence was love. That when Mom didn't defend me, it was because she didn't want to stir conflict. That when Dad stared at his plate while Sophie sneered at me, it was because he hated confrontation. But deep down, I knew silence was just another form of betrayal. There was one night that still burns in my memory. I had been working a double shift at the nursery, dirt clinging to my fingernails, my back aching from hauling sacks of soil. I came home past 10, exhausted and starving. I heated leftovers quietly in the kitchen. Sophie marched in, her music blasting through earbuds. She stopped, yanked them out, and pointed at a mug I had left rinsed, but not dried, in the sink. "You always leave your crap around. Do you think this is your house?" Her words cut sharper than the tired ache in my bones. Mom was folding laundry at the table. She glanced at us, then bent her head lower. Dad kept reading the sports section. Not a word, not a single defense. I swallowed, set my fork down, and said softly, "I pay the water that washes those mugs, Sophie." She snorted. "Congratulations. Want a medal?" I took my plate and ate in my room. That was the night I realized I was feeding mouths that could not even give me dignity in return. But the betrayal was not always loud. Sometimes it was small, like death by paper cuts. At Christmas, Sophie always had the newest phone, the trendiest purse. My gifts were socks, a book no one remembered I already owned. Mom would say, "You're practical, Claire. You don't need much." As if needing less meant I deserved nothing. When I was younger, Sophie and I used to share secrets. She whispered about boys she liked, about how scared she was of thunderstorms. She used to call me her best friend. I held onto that memory like a pressed flower in a book, something fragile but beautiful. But every year the memory faded. She began talking to me only to insult me. "Your clothes are depressing. You'll never move out. No wonder nobody wants you." Each jab chipped away at what little hope I had left. Still, I told myself to endure. I believed loyalty was measured by how much pain you could absorb without breaking. I didn't realize loyalty without respect is just self-destruction. One spring, the roof leaked again. Rain dripped into pots and pans scattered across the hallway. I wrote the check for the repair while Dad muttered, "You're a lifesaver, Claire." But the words felt hollow. They were always temporary bandages on a wound that never healed. The next week, Sophie bragged about buying new shoes with her freelance check, while I rationed groceries to make sure we had enough for the electricity bill. Sometimes I thought about Bloom & Grace. I would drive past the corner where my shop once stood, now replaced by a cafe with neon lights. I could almost smell the roses, almost hear the bell above the door as a bride walked in. My heart ached like I had buried a child. That shop was my freedom, my identity. I gave it up for them, and in return, I became invisible. I remember one evening in particular. The air smelled of cut grass, neighbors grilling in their yards. Sophie was on the porch scrolling through her phone. I sat beside her, desperate to bridge the chasm. "Do you remember when we used to sleep under the stars?" Sophie asked. She didn't look up. "That was kid stuff. Back then you said I was your best friend." She finally glanced at me, her eyes cold. "Yeah, well, people grow up. You're just stuck." Her words slammed into me harder than any storm. I smiled weakly, nodded, and said nothing. But inside something snapped. Moments like that piled up until they weighed more than the bills I paid. And yet I kept going, because stopping felt impossible. Because I thought if I gave enough, they would finally see me. Then came the anniversary dinner. I spent days planning. I ordered a cake dusted with rose petals, my way of honoring both my parents' love and the flower shop I once owned. I cooked side dishes, decorated the dining room, ironed the tablecloth. Neighbors came, relatives filled the chairs, laughter swirled in the air. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe tonight they would remember who I was. But when Sophie stood glass raised and announced that I was holding the family back, the laughter collapsed. Forks clinked awkwardly, neighbors exchanged nervous glances, and the cake in the center of the table became a monument to everything I had sacrificed that no one cared to touch. My mother's silence was heavier than Sophie's cruelty. My father's sip of wine was a verdict. I smiled, stood and walked out, my legs trembling under the weight of years. That was the night I finally understood I had never been their daughter, not really. I had been their safety net, their quiet mule. And safety nets are invisible until they are gone. I did not sleep that night after the anniversary dinner. I lay in a motel bed that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the hum of the old air conditioner. My suitcase sat half unzipped by the door clothes, spilling out like an unspoken truth. For the first time in years, I wasn't listening for Sophie's footsteps in the hallway, or Mom's call for help with a bill, or Dad's voice asking if I could cover just one more expense. The silence was strange. It felt empty, but also freeing. My mind kept drifting backward through 5 long years of sacrifice. 5 years of writing checks with my name on them, while my own dreams dried out like flowers left without water. I remembered the day I closed Bloom and Grace. The landlord shook my hand, the for lease sign went up, and I stood in the doorway inhaling the scent of roses one last time. Sophie hadn't come to help me pack. She was at a concert posting photos online. That should have told me everything, but I was too blinded by loyalty. In the motel, I scrolled through my bank app, staring at the rows of automatic payments. Electricity, water, internet, insurance, repairs. Nearly $2,000 each month gone without a second thought. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the screen. And then click. Cancel electricity. Click. Cancel water. Click. Cancel internet. Each tap felt like cutting a string that had tied me down. By the time I finished, my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I whispered into the stale motel air, "Let's see how they live without me." It didn't take long for the consequences to ripple back. 3 days later, Sophie's name lit up my phone. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice was sharp, frantic. "What did you do, Claire? The internet's down. I can't send my freelance work. Mom's freaking out about the power bill. Turn it back on now." I held the phone steady. "You said you wanted to live without me. This is what that looks like." Her bitter laugh cracked through the line. "You're so sensitive. No one wants you around. This is exactly why." Then she hung up. I stared at the dark screen, waiting for the familiar sting of shame. But there was none. My hands didn't shake. My throat didn't close. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix it. That night, Mom called. Her voice was softer, pleading. "Sweetheart, please. The house is falling apart. Your dad can't get mower jobs without Wi-Fi. Sophie's losing her work. We need you." I closed my eyes, picturing her twisting her hands the way she did when she wanted to sound gentle. But all I saw in my mind was her silence at the dinner table. Her silence when Sophie called me a mooch. Mom, I whispered, Sophie told me you'd all be better off without me. You didn't disagree. So I'm giving her exactly what she asked for. And I hung up. The following weeks unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. Janet, the neighbor who thrived on gossip, texted me, "Everything okay with your folks?" The house looks rough. I drove past once to grab a package nearby. The lawn was knee-high, the mailbox stuffed with envelopes, curtains drawn, windows dark. It didn't look like the home I had bled for. It looked abandoned, defeated. But the cracks ran deeper. At David and Hannah's kitchen table over the smell of lemon soap and coffee, I told them everything. Hannah listened, her eyes soft with empathy. David leaned back, jaw tight. "Reminds me of Edward Hayes," he said. "Carried his daughter for years, paid her bills, her daycare. One day she called him controlling, said he was dragging her down, so he cut everything off. Within a month she was begging him. He never went back." His words stuck in my chest. "Sometimes people need to feel the weight," he said. "Otherwise they'll never value what you carry." Hannah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've been carrying them for too long, Claire. What happens when you finally stop?" Her question echoed long after I left. What happens when I stop? The answer came faster than I expected. Mom showed up at David and Hannah's door 2 weeks later, her face pale, lips trembling, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "The bank's moving forward," she blurted before she even sat down. "Rebecca's working nights, but it's not enough. Your dad's falling behind on everything. We're drowning." I stayed seated, calm, almost cold. "Mom, for 5 years I carried every bill. I gave up my shop, my savings, my freedom. And when Sophie told me you'd all be better off without me, you stayed silent. Now you see what life looks like without me." Her eyes filled with tears. "She didn't mean it," she whispered. "You know how your sister is. Please, sweetheart, just until we're stable again." Her words fell flat. I remembered every eye roll, every insult, every lonely meal in my room while paying their bills. I shook my head. "You wanted to see what life looked like without me? Now you see it." She sagged, whispering, "I thought family meant more to you." Then she left, her perfume lingering like a ghost. I wish I could say I felt victorious, but really, I felt hollow, like a candle burned out. I sat at David and Hannah's table long after she was gone, staring at the folder of bills I had once kept meticulously, now collecting dust. I had chosen myself, but choosing myself came with an echo of grief. Still deep down, a seed of clarity had been planted. I wasn't going back. Not this time. The weeks after Mom showed up at David and Hannah's door felt like watching a dam break in slow motion. I had pulled out one stone, and now the cracks spread everywhere. For once, I wasn't rushing to patch them. I was just watching. And in the silence, I started to notice things I had ignored for years. One afternoon, I sat at the small desk in my motel room with my laptop open. The screen glowed with rows of canceled payments. Each line used to be my burden. Electricity, $310. Water, $98. Internet, $82. Property tax, $490. I scrolled down, a strange calm spreading in my chest. How had I carried this weight for so long? My cursor hovered over payment history. Out of curiosity, I clicked. The list stretched endlessly, 5 years of transactions every month like scars on a body. Proof that I had given everything. I downloaded the files, naming each by month and year, and stored them on a flash drive. At the time, I wasn't sure why. Maybe part of me already knew this wasn't over, that I would need these receipts like armor one day. A few nights later, Sophie called again. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "Claire, you're ruining us. I can't work without internet. Do you even care? You're pathetic. You'll regret this." I replayed it once, then twice. Something about her tone, it wasn't just anger, it was fear. I saved the voicemail. A piece of evidence, though, I wasn't yet sure for what. At the nursery where I worked, I began to collect more than paychecks. A coworker mentioned offhand that she had seen Sophie at the credit union downtown. I felt a pang of suspicion. I hadn't set foot in that place since I sold my shop. That night I drove, there sat in my car, staring at the glowing windows. My gut told me Sophie wasn't just freelancing. Something was off. I made an appointment the next day under my name. The clerk, a young man with neat hair, tapped at his keyboard and frowned. Ms. Anderson, you already have a line of credit here. My stomach dropped. Excuse me. He turned the screen toward me. There it was. My name. My social security number tied to a credit card I never applied for. Charges listed: online shopping, restaurant bills, even a deposit for a vacation rental. My pulse hammered. Who opened this? I asked, my voice low. Application was online. Linked to this address, he read: my parents' house. Sophie. I asked for copies of the account. The clerk hesitated. We'd need a fraud investigation request. So I called a lawyer. Sitting in his office, clutching my worn purse, I explained everything. He leaned back, eyes sharp behind his glasses. If your sister opened accounts in your name, that's identity theft. Keep records. Get statements. Do not confront her yet. Chain of custody matters. If this goes to court, you'll want it airtight. I left his office with a folder of forms, my head spinning. Proof was piling up around me like stones for a fortress. At night, I kept spreading papers across the motel desk: bank statements, auto payment receipts, Sophie's voicemail, now credit card documents. I labeled each in neat handwriting. Mortgage 2019, taxes 2020, Sophie voicemail August. I felt like I was building a case file on my own family, but proof wasn't just numbers, it was memories. The more I wrote, the more I remembered the times they had dismissed me. I began to jot down notes. Christmas 2018, socks for me, iPhone for Sophie. Roof repair, Dad said, lifesaver. Mom silent when Sophie insulted me. Not because memories would hold up in court, but because they reminded me why I was doing this, why I couldn't go back. The turning point came one humid evening at David and Hannah's. I sat at their table, paperwork spread out, my flash drive next to my coffee. Hannah brushed a hand over the pages. Claire, this is more than bills. This is a story. And stories matter when people try to twist the truth. David nodded. They'll try to make you the villain. You need to show who carried the load. His words rang in my head. Show who carried the load. For 5 years, I had been the invisible backbone. Now, with every document, I was giving that backbone a voice. But the heaviest discovery was still ahead. The folder of evidence grew thicker by the day. At first, I stacked everything in neat piles, but soon the papers sprawled across the motel desk, creeping onto the bed and the nightstand. Receipts curled at the edges, the ink smudged from my fingertips. The flash drive sat like a talisman beside my coffee cup, glowing faintly when the desk lamp caught its silver edge. I kept telling myself, don't waste this. Don't let them twist the story again. One morning, I drove past my parents' house on the way to work. Dew clung to the grass, but their lawn was knee-high and wild. The shutters sagged and paint peeled from the trim. A notice envelope was taped to the door. My stomach turned. For years, I had kept that house standing. Now stripped of my payments, it was collapsing in front of the whole neighborhood. I snapped a photo with my phone. Evidence not just of foreclosure, but of neglect of their dependents. Later that week, Janet cornered me in the grocery store. She leaned close, her breath smelling of peppermint gum. Claire, is it true you cut your family off? People are talking. Gregory can't get work. Sophie's stocking shelves at night. Linda looks 10 years older. I bit my tongue. For once, I didn't defend myself. I just said, maybe it's time people saw the truth. Janet blinked, surprised, then hurried off to spread whatever version of my words she wanted. Another piece of proof gossip as a mirror of decline. But the deepest crack revealed itself through a single envelope. One evening, while sorting documents with my lawyer, I mentioned my parents' debts. He flipped through his files, frowning. Did you know your father still holds a life insurance policy from 20 years ago? It matured 5 years ago, right when you sold your shop. The words punched the air from my lungs. I gripped the arm of the chair. What? He slid the paper toward me. Numbers stared back. A sum large enough to have saved the house. Money they never touched or never told me about. My chest tightened, my vision blurring. They had let me give up Bloom and Grace while sitting on a policy that could have saved them. Why? Pride, greed. Or because they knew I would always sacrifice first, I left the office shaking, clutching the copy of that policy. It wasn't just negligence anymore. It was betrayal with intent. My parents had chosen silence chosen to let me bleed out my dreams while they hoarded a lifeline. That night, I sat at Hannah's kitchen table, the document between us. Tears stung my eyes, but my voice was flat. They let me sell my shop for nothing. Hannah reached across her hand, warm. Claire, this is bigger than bills. This shows they used you. David's jaw tightened. You need to bring this forward. It's not just about Sophie anymore. It's all of them. I nodded, feeling a strange calm. My evidence had teeth now. Over the next days, I became meticulous. I printed copies of everything. I bought a second flash drive, labeling it in neat black marker backup. I stored one at the Motel One with Hannah. I sealed key documents in envelopes, signing across the flap to mark if anyone tampered. The lawyer notarized statements ensuring they couldn't be dismissed. For once, I wasn't scrambling to fix their chaos. I was building my own defense brick by brick. And still Sophie made it easy. She left me voicemails full of venom. You're pathetic, Claire. Everyone knows you'll come crawling back. You always do. Each time I saved the recording. Her arrogance was a gift proof that she assumed I'd stay in chains. One evening, she even texted from an unknown number. If you don't fix this, I'll make sure everyone knows what a failure you are. I screenshotted it instantly. Another stone on my side of the scale, but the moment that sealed my resolve came at the credit union. The fraud investigator, a stern woman with steel gray hair, slid a folder across the desk. Inside were Sophie's applications signed electronically, but with my name. Dates lined up with the months I had been drowning in bills. Purchases that had nothing to do with me sparkled across the pages. Spa treatments, designer handbags, a weekend in Galveston. Ms. Anderson, the investigator, said this is a clear case of identity theft. You can pursue charges if you wish. At the very least, it's admissible evidence. I traced the dates with my finger, each one like a knife. Sophie hadn't just insulted me. She had stolen from me. She had built her comforts on my name. Driving back to the motel, papers strapped into the passenger seat, I felt the shift inside me. For years, I had been reactive, patching holes, bending under weight. Now I was active, deliberate. I wasn't just surviving their betrayal, I was preparing to expose it. That night, I spread everything across the motel bed, the bank statements, the canceled payments, the credit union files, the insurance policy, Sophie's voicemails and texts. I whispered aloud, "This is enough." My voice shook, but not with fear, with certainty. For the first time, I felt like I held the power. I gathered the papers into folders, slid the flash drive into my pocket, and stood at the mirror. My reflection looked tired, hollow-eyed. But beneath that, I saw something else: steel. The kind of steel that forms only after fire. I knew exactly what came next. The proof wasn't just for me anymore. It was for the world to see. And soon they would. By the time autumn rolled into Austin, the evidence wasn't just a pile of paper anymore. It was a weapon. And weapons, I knew, had to be wielded carefully. I sat at the lawyer's office again, the afternoon sun slanting across his desk. The blinds cut the light into sharp stripes, painting my hands as they trembled over the folder I carried. He adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents I had painstakingly organized: bank statements, notarized receipts, Sophie's credit applications, even the insurance policy my parents had hidden. "You've done your homework," he said, finally tapping a page. "If this goes public, they can't deny it. But you need to be smart. Keep everything in chain of custody. No leaks, no emotional outbursts. Save it for the right venue. I leaned forward. And what's the right venue? He looked at me steadily. The foreclosure hearing. It's already scheduled. Neutral ground legal authority witnesses in the room. That's where your evidence will matter most. My heart pounded. I had imagined confronting Sophie in the kitchen throwing receipts in her face. But this was bigger. Public. Official. It would leave no shadows for them to twist the story. Until then, he continued make copies, backups, print and digital, seal envelopes, keep one with a trusted person. If anything happens to your originals, you'll still be covered. I nodded, scribbling notes, though my mind was already racing ahead. The hearing wasn't just a chance to protect myself, it was a stage. And for once, the stage would be mine. That night, back at the motel, I laid everything out like a ritual. I printed every statement, sliding them into plastic sleeves, labeling them by year. I burned them onto 2 flash drives, sealing one in a padded envelope and handing it to Hannah the next morning. If anything happens to me or my files, give this to the lawyer, I told her. She hugged me, her grip strong as if she knew the weight of what I carried. I rehearsed small details like a soldier preparing for battle. I bought new ink cartridges, made double copies of Sophie's voicemails, even saved them to the cloud with password protection. Late at night, I whispered the dates and amounts like prayers. March 2019 roof repair, $3,400. July 2020 property tax, $2,200. Proof carved into my memory so they could never gaslight me again. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed to think like them, predict their moves, prepare counters. Sophie would scream denial, Dad would rage, Mom would cry, hoping to sway pity. I had to be colder than all of them, steady as stone. So I started writing scripts. Not for them, for me. Short, sharp lines I could repeat without wavering. I didn't abandon you. I paid for 5 years. You said you'd rather live without me. Now you are. I have proof. It speaks louder than tears. I practiced in the mirror, holding the flash drive like a gavel. Each time my voice cracked, I started again until it was flat, calm, undeniable. Still, fear crept in at night. What if they walked out of the hearing before I could speak? What if Sophie destroyed the documents? What if I froze under the judge's stare? I shared my worries with David one evening. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Then you plan for every risk, he said. If they walk out, you have someone ready to stop them. If they interrupt, you have the judge on your side. If they try to twist it, you have copies. Always have a backup to your backup. His words became my mantra, backup to the backup. So I drafted contingencies. If the power went out, I'd have printed copies ready. If Sophie shouted over me, I'd hand the evidence to the clerk instead of raising my voice. If Dad accused me of lying, I'd call on the investigator from the credit union to verify. Every possible angle, I covered it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to their chaos. I was designing the moment. And the more I planned, the steadier I felt. Like arranging flowers in bloom and grace, each petal placed with purpose, each stem trimmed to fit. Only this time the bouquet wasn't for a bride, it was for me. A bouquet of truth bound in evidence waiting to be delivered at the perfect moment. The closer the foreclosure hearing drew, the more I realized this wasn't just about paper and ink. It was about presence. If I walked in shaky, desperate, they'd spin the narrative like they always did. I had to appear untouchable, even if my heart thundered inside my chest. So I rehearsed my entrance. In the motel's tiny bathroom mirror, I stood tall, shoulders squared, chin lifted. I practiced laying the folder on the counter with slow, deliberate movements. No fumbling, no nervous smiles. Just calm. I even bought a simple navy blazer secondhand, but sharp enough to signal I wasn't the doormat they remembered. When I slipped it on, I barely recognized myself. The reflection staring back had steel in her eyes. Hannah and David became my allies in every detail. Hannah kept one sealed envelope of evidence in her safe tucked behind her family photos. David drilled me with questions like a courtroom rehearsal. What if Sophie says you forged the documents? I'll ask the clerk to confirm the signatures and timestamps. What if your father calls you ungrateful? I'll remind the judge that 5 years of receipts speak louder than words. Each mock exchange steadied my pulse. Each answer chipped away at the fear that had ruled me for so long. Still, there were risks I couldn't control. Sophie had always been cunning. I wouldn't put it past her to twist crocodile tears into sympathy. Mom might plead with trembling hands, reminding everyone she was sick once, trying to paint me as cruel. Dad could lash out physically. The thought sent a chill down my spine. But then I remembered the bailiff would be there, the judge's gavel within reach. For once, authority would stand between us. The night before the hearing, I spread my tools on the motel bed like a soldier counting weapons. Primary folder of bank statements, receipts, policy papers. Secondary folder sealed with my signature locked in Hannah's safe. Flash drive 1 clipped to my keychain. Flash drive 2 in a padded envelope at the lawyer's office. Sophie's voicemails saved in 3 places: phone cloud and printed transcripts. The investigator's card from the credit union ready to call if denial came. I whispered to myself, "You won't raise your voice. You won't beg. You'll just show the truth." Over and over until the words settled into my bones. But beneath the armor of preparation, something fragile flickered. The little girl who once lay under Texas stars with Sophie, who promised never to leave her side, still ached. I wondered if exposing them would feel like killing what was left of that promise. I wondered if I would regret it. Then I remembered the insurance policy, the lies, the years of silence while I drowned, and the ache hardened into resolve. On the morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. The motel air was cool, the hum of the air conditioner steady. I dressed carefully, the blazer-pressed slacks, hair tied back. No perfume, no jewelry. Nothing they could mock as vanity. Just clean, sharp lines. I slid the flash drive into my pocket, its weight oddly comforting like a lucky charm. Outside, the sky glowed pale pink. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, letting the city wake around me. Cars rolled past, people hurried to jobs, and for once, I wasn't rushing to cover someone else's bill. I was walking toward my own fight. By the time I met Hannah and David at the courthouse steps, my nerves had settled into something colder focus. Hannah squeezed my hand. "You've got this, Claire." David nodded, his jaw set. I looked up at the courthouse doors, heavy oak framed by stone columns. They loomed like a threshold between my past and whatever came next. I tightened my grip on the folder and whispered under my breath. I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't need to. Then I pushed the doors open. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a mix of history and judgment. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked down the hallway, clutching the folder to my chest. Every step echoed, reminding me that I was no longer sneaking through my own home like a ghost. Here, the silence belonged to me. The hearing room was already buzzing when I entered. Neighbors had trickled in, faces I recognized from block parties and grocery aisles. They sat in the back rows, whispering behind hands. Janet was there too, eyes bright with curiosity, as if she had been waiting for this scandal to bloom. At the front, Sophie sat with her arms crossed, her nails chipped, a defensive smirk plastered on her face. Mom twisted a tissue in her lap, her shoulders trembling. Dad stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his posture rigid with pride. I took a seat a few rows back. They didn't notice me at first. My lawyer leaned toward me, murmuring, "Stay calm. Wait until the right moment." The judge entered, robes flowing, and the room stood briefly before settling. The case was called Foreclosure Proceedings for Gregory and Linda Anderson. The words carried like a funeral bell through the paneled walls. Mom dabbed at her eyes. Dad cleared his throat. Sophie stood, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, my parents are good people. They tried to hold this house together, but Claire abandoned us. She stopped paying, suddenly left us in ruins. We're the victims here." The neighbors gasped. A murmur spread like wildfire. I felt heat rising in my chest, but I stayed seated. The judge nodded slowly. We will review the financial records. Are there statements to support your claims? Dad leaned forward. We can explain. Our eldest daughter, she turned her back on family obligations. She could have helped, but she chose selfishness. That's why we're here. Each word was a knife, but instead of cutting me down, it sharpened my resolve. I rose slowly, the folder heavy in my hand. The room stilled as I stepped forward, heels tapping until I reached the clerk's table. Your Honor. I said, my voice steady. I am Claire Anderson, and I did not abandon my family. For 5 years, I paid every mortgage bill, every utility, every repair. I sold my business to keep that roof over their heads. I laid the folder on the table and slid it toward the clerk. These are bank statements, 5 years of transactions, all in my name, each payment, each receipt. Proof that I carried them when they couldn't stand on their own. The clerk flipped through the papers. Gasps rippled across the room. Janet's eyes widened, whispering to the woman beside her. The judge leaned forward, scanning the documents. Behind me, Sophie shot to her feet. She's lying. She's just trying to make us look bad. Her voice cracked more panic than conviction. I turned to face her, my voice calm but cutting. Check the dates. Check the amounts. Every month without fail. That wasn't abandonment, Sophie. That was sacrifice. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The judge tapped his pen against the bench. These records appear consistent. We'll verify with the bank. He looked over his glasses at Sophie and my parents. Do you dispute these transactions? Dad's face reddened. She's twisting it. She always thought she was better than us? The judge raised a hand. This is not about feelings. This is about facts. And so far, the facts favor Ms. Anderson. I stood tall, the flash drive in my pocket, warm against my palm. I hadn't even played my final card yet. The silence after the judge's words was suffocating. Sophie's smirk had vanished, replaced by a twitch at the corner of her mouth. Mom wrung her tissue until it tore shreds, falling into her lap. Dad shifted in his seat, his fists clenched on the table. I could have stopped there. The bank statements alone told the story. But this wasn't just about covering bills. This was about the truth. They had buried the lies they had used to erase my sacrifice. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the flash drive. Its metal edge caught the courtroom light. Your Honor, I said, my tone level, there's more. My sister opened credit accounts in my name, without my consent. These are the application records confirmed by the credit union's fraud department. I handed the drive and a printed packet to the clerk. She flipped through, eyebrows rising. The judge gestured for her to read. Applications signed under Claire Anderson's name but tied to the Anderson residence address, she said. Purchases include luxury goods, travel expenses, charges spanning the last 3 years. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Janet covered her mouth, whispering furiously to the neighbor beside her. Sophie bolted upright. That's not true. She's framing me. Her voice cracked loud and desperate. The judge's gaze sharpened. Ms. Anderson, the credit union has certified these records. Unless you can provide alternate explanations, this is a serious matter. I turned toward Sophie, my voice cool. You said I abandoned you, but you were living off my name even as you spat on me. Do you call that abandonment? Her face flushed deep crimson. She sputtered, but nothing came out. The room buzzed with whispers. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Ungrateful. His shout echoed. You dare humiliate us in front of everyone. He started to rise, but the bailiff stepped forward, a hand on his shoulder. I didn't flinch. I met his glare and said low but clear. The humiliation wasn't mine. It was the silence you gave while she tore me apart. Mom's voice broke thin and trembling. Claire, please. We're family. Don't do this to us. Tears streaked down her cheeks. For years that sound would have undone me, but now it only rang hollow. The judge cleared his throat, heavy and deliberate. This hearing concerns foreclosure. Based on the evidence provided, responsibility for these debts lies with Gregory and Linda Anderson. Additionally, the matter of fraudulent accounts may be referred for further investigation. The gavel struck once. Final. Around us, the crowd shifted. Some shook their heads, others leaned close to whisper. The gossip that once drowned me now devoured them. Sophie sank back into her chair, eyes wide, phone slipping from her fingers. The screen cracked as it hit the floor. Dad's jaw clenched so tight his face turned crimson. Mom covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing. I gathered my folder, sliding the flash drive back into my pocket. My movements were deliberate, unhurried. For years I had been invisible, silent, erased. Now every eye in the room followed me. As I turned to leave, Dad growled, his voice low and venomous. You think this makes you strong? You ruined this family. I stopped in the aisle, my back to him. Then, without raising my voice, I said, This family ruined itself the night you stayed silent. The doors creaked open as I pushed them, sunlight flooding in, bright and blinding. Behind me, the weight of their collapse filled the courtroom. Ahead of me, for the first time in years, was air I could breathe. The courthouse doors slammed behind me, but their echoes followed. For days afterward, I could still hear Dad's growl, Mom's sobs, Sophie's shrill denial. Yet outside those paneled walls, life kept moving. The sun rose, traffic hummed, neighbors trimmed lawns. Only their world had stopped. The foreclosure was finalized within weeks. Notices appeared in the paper, public for anyone to read. Their house, our house, was scheduled for auction. I didn't need to spread the news. The neighborhood did it for me. Janet cornered me at the post office, eyes wide with gossip. Claire, everyone's talking. Gregory can't find steady work. Sophie's on night shifts at the supermarket. Linda, well, she hardly comes out anymore. For years, those whispers would have burned me alive with shame. Now I just nodded. People finally see the truth. At the credit union, the fraud investigation pushed forward. Sophie received formal notices demanding repayment for the accounts in my name. She tried texting me a barrage of desperate messages. Please, Claire, it was just one card. I didn't think you'd find out. We can fix this if you help me. I didn't reply. My lawyer did, with 3 clipped sentences. All future communication must go through counsel. Further contact outside this channel will be considered harassment. Mom called too late at night, her voice ragged. Sweetheart, we're losing everything. Please, just one more time. Help us. Your father's not well. Sophie made mistakes, but she's your sister. I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to her breath hitch, and finally said the words I had rehearsed. I'm not available for this version of family anymore. Then I hung up. I didn't slam the phone. I didn't cry. My hands were steady. That was the difference. Neighbors stopped by David and Hannah's house, asking questions they didn't dare ask me directly. Is it true Claire saved them for years? Did Sophie really steal her name? Each answer spread like wildfire. The same neighborhood that once looked at me as the quiet spinster now looked at me with something else, respect, maybe even awe. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but relief. The truth had finally stepped out of the shadows. Meanwhile, my parents shrank inside theirs. I drove past the house once before the auction. Weeds choked the lawn, blinds hung crooked, and the mailbox sagged with uncollected letters. It no longer looked like the place I had fought to save. It looked like a monument to choices left rotting. Sophie avoided me in public. Once at the supermarket, I caught sight of her pushing a cart, her hair pulled back, messily, dark circles under her eyes. She froze when she saw me, then darted down another aisle. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. She was already running from herself. Dad never spoke directly again. Through the lawyer, he sent one bitter line. You'll regret humiliating us. I smiled when I read it. Humiliation wasn't mine to carry anymore. Setting boundaries wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small ones, deleting Sophie's voicemails without listening, refusing Mom's calls, redirecting neighbors who wanted me to forgive and forget. Each no built a wall that kept me safe. And for the first time in my life, that wall didn't feel like isolation. It felt like home. At night, I sometimes open the folder of evidence again, not to torment myself, but to remind myself of the cost of silence. Each receipt, each transcript was a scar, and scars don't disappear. But scars also mean survival. The final act of closure came when the auction notice was published. Their house was gone, sold to strangers. I didn't attend the sale. I didn't need to. The past had already been written, and I had stepped out of its pages. I closed the folder one last time, slid it into a locked drawer, and whispered, "Enough." 6 months later, the rhythm of my life was unrecognizable. My mornings no longer began with bills or whispered insults, but with sunlight streaming through tall windows in my new condo. The space was small but mine, every corner touched only by my choices. I reopened a tiny studio not as grand as Bloom and Grace once was, but filled with buckets of lilies, roses, and baby's breath. Brides came timid, left glowing. Children pressed noses to the glass, pointing at colors brighter than their imaginations. Each arrangement I crafted felt like stitching myself back together, petal by petal. The flash drive still sat in my drawer, but it no longer burned like a wound. It was simply a reminder, a quiet token that I survived, that truth had weight. Sometimes I still heard Sophie's voice echoing, "You're holding us back." But it no longer pierced me, because now I knew I had never been the burden. I had been the backbone. And choosing myself wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Family should never mean sacrificing your entire self just to earn silence. Sometimes the bravest choice is drawing a line and protecting your worth. What about you? Have you ever had to set boundaries with the very people who were supposed to love you most? Share your story in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.